I'd like to welcome you to our forum, Superstorm Sandy, a look back and a look ahead at disaster recovery. Our program will bring to light the work and the people involved. Almost 1 year ago today, it was amazing to see the public and private sectors come together in the wake of an unprecedented disaster to develop creative solutions to help our city recover from the storm. We will focus on the issues that came to light in the aftermath and the lessons learned in an effort to develop effective best practices in the future. Our work is far from complete. We must all look ahead and continue to anticipate the necessary solutions now before they are needed. By working together with our public agencies to create comprehensive plans for environmental emergencies, our industry can offer a tremendous advantage if and when disaster strikes. In today's seminar, we will focus on ways to establish order in situations that are inherently chaotic and maintain the relationships that have helped us bounce back from these types of disasters in the past. On behalf of the Environmental Contractors Association, I would like to thank all our speakers and panelists for joining us today and sharing the lessons they learned as a result of Hurricane Sandy. We are proud of the positive impact made by the environmental remediation community following the superstorm, and we look forward to continuing to work hard to maintain the safety of our city far into the future. Now I would like to introduce Bob Avatroni of Four Bridges Consulting Services, who will kick off our program. Bob is a member of the Environmental Advisory Committee, which works towards advancing the remediation industry by identifying environmental issues and mitigation plans through best practices. The Council addresses issues ranging from asbestos abatement to pathogen contamination and reducing risks for all facilities through effective and safe remediation. Please join me in welcoming Bob.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much. And I want to thank everybody for being here today. Obviously, the subject is something that's very topical. And just to take a step back for a second, it was actually a Thursday last year when we had our last conference, and we spoke about a number of issues, and we talked at that time as well. The storm was bearing down on the city of New York, and we spoke a little bit about weather patterns and not knowing the full breadth of what we were about to be confronted with. In fact, I remember one of the people that we spoke with was Brad Geer, who's here today, who will be the moderator of the second panel, and Deputy Mayor Holloway. And the first thing that Deputy Mayor Holloway asked Brad was, well, what do you hear, because he was in the private sector, what do you hear about the storm? And Brad said, well, I hear it's going to be a pretty bad one. I don't think anybody anticipated it being as bad as it was. But it was just systemic to basically other situations the city has been confronted with in the past. And you know, we can go back to the days of post 9/11, obviously a terrorist attack. We can go into other areas, building collapses throughout the city, steam pipe explosions, when you don't know really what takes place. And it all comes back to really reassessing where we are as a city and saying, you know, the one thing in common is that every natural disaster has a common thread. And that common thread has an impact on the environment. Whether it be a 9/11 situation and the Trade Center site. We all see what happened post 9/11. In fact, I think today's the last day of cutoff where people are enrolling, you know, to be protected with health issues. We look at situations, Sandy, an extraordinary job was done by this administration and by the deputy mayor to really move on the fly with what we had in place as a city. The citywide incident management system was in place, the core competency of each agency was there, but the fact of the matter is we just didn't have enough. And that's where the importance of public-private partnerships becomes critical. And, you know, every time we go down this path, today you're going to look back. We're going to take a look back and reflect on what happened last year. But we're also going to look ahead. And I think that's the most important thing, because from each individual catastrophe that we've been confronted with, you learn. And from there you learn, and you learn how to implement. And then you come to the evaluation. It's undeniable. The evaluation promotes public-private partnerships. That's why we're very pleased to have a diverse group in the audience, two great panels, one which will take a look at some of the things we were confronted with in Sandy and reflect back. And as I said, we had an unprecedented disaster that was handled in an unprecedented way, because much of what was done was on the fly. You'll see people being honored from LISC, the Mayor's Fund of the City of New York, Robin Hood Foundation. All these people played a critical role, and I'm very proud of what the Environmental Contractors Association did. I'm proud to represent them as an advisor consultant, just as I was proud to be part of the Bloomberg administration, part of the Giuliani administration. And we may have a change in the mayoralty, in coming up, but the next mayor, whether it be Bill de Blasio or Joe Lota, two people that I have worked with, they're going to need the assistance of all the people that are assembled here. People can have their political views or what have you. The fact of the matter is the mayor that takes over will have to govern the city of New York. And that person will need our assistance. They'll need us collaboratively, collectively, to come together, unified, to deal with issues of disasters. Obviously, the day-to-day dealings they will take care of, and we'll be there for them as well. But if we don't have a readiness, a sense of preparedness, a sense of resiliency in this city, then all bets are off, because we're confronted with a situation. Not only are we impacted by these disasters, but we're impacted by the economic outgrowth. It's how we get people back up and running in terms of business when you're confronted with a disaster like Sandy. It's how you get people back into their homes. It all has an impact not on the humane portion of life, but on the economic vitality of New York City, and in fact, as the country as a whole. So I thank you for all coming. We're going to have some great panels, and I think what you'll see today is a reflection of where we've been, but more a reflection of where we're going collaboratively, and we're going to get things done. Thank you. I have the pleasure of introducing a guy that I was introduced to months ago, and he has played a prominent role in our advisory committee. This is an independent committee from the ECA, but it's a derivative of the ECA. We came together again realizing that we needed to do more, and having a think tank was the best way to go. And Doug Gorey, STV Group, who you're going to meet and hear from in a second, is one of the people that we've elected as the chairperson. So Doug is, again, getting the information that's needed, obviously from the experts in the field of environmental remediation, and we're putting something together, again, that speaks to what I just said, collaborative effort, public-private partnerships, and I introduce Doug Gorey.
Good morning, everybody. So like Bob said, thank you very much. My name is Doug Glory. I'm with STV Incorporated and also the chairman of the Environmental Advisory Council. I'll tell you a little bit about the Environmental Advisory Council before I get into our next panel here. We're a group of industry experts that are here at your disposal. So you can rely on us. You can call us if you have any questions about any environmental industry issues you'd like answered. And as well as we're looking for volunteers to join our group. This is a new organization. Part of our panel, we've got members including Gary DiPaolo of Structure Tone, Steve Perlocos, Substructure Tone, Bob Albatrani, and Chief Tobin are on our panel right now. But we're always looking to grow and bring other experts in to help us advise the industry on issues. Some of the issues we're working on right now are the issues of vermiculite, which is a current topic in the industry, as well as mold. We are working on a white paper right now with this group to be released probably in the spring to advise the industry. How should we handle mold after the next disaster, or mold on a regular basis? What are the issues we want to look at? So today we've got a panel of industry experts on this first panel who are integral in the recovery effort. Although they were prepared for Sandy, each panelist has a story to tell us about the unprecedented challenges they faced and how they overcame that challenge. Typically, engineers prepare designs for remediation, and in the process, we consider all the issues that may arise during a typical abatement project. Hurricane Sandy was not a typical storm, and the cleanup that followed was not a typical remediation project. In the first few days after the storm, there was no time for design, only for emergency response. The panelists, their companies, and the industry responded with expertise and efficiency that allowed New York City to get back to work quickly. This panel will explore problems that came to light during and after the storm, including issues with fire protection, labor, power, fuel, hazmat and mold, electricity, and communications. A part of the discussion will focus on the need to have properly trained contractors and the potential consequences for untrained workers and volunteers. So I'd like to invite our panelists up to join me for this next discussion. And on our panel today, we have Gary DiPaolo with Structure Tone, Abraham Hernandez with Local 78, Asbestos, Lead, and Hazardous Waste Laborers, Morris Napolitano with Degmore, Chief Richard Tobin, New York City Fire Department, and Daniel Zarilli, the Mayor's Office, Long-Term Planning and Sustainability. So, all right. So the panelists today, we'll ask them a series of questions, and we'll have a discussion-type forum, and then at the end, we'll try to have some questions. If you have any specific issues you'd like addressed, we'll try to address those as well. So the first question I'll pose to the panel is, what were some of the unprecedented challenges and surprises that you observed during and after Hurricane Sandy?
Well, my biggest surprise was the fumes we ran into. Mm-hmm. The entire basement's filled up with fumes to the point where you couldn't even go down. I anticipated some chemicals being spilled and you're having a little situations here or there with the chemicals. But when the storm came, the power of the storm turned the fuel tanks upside down, and fuel oil, which heated all these buildings, thousands and thousands of gallons, was spilled in the basements. The fumes, you just couldn't go down. First, I was scared the whole place might blow up. So we had to get it tested to make sure that the fumes weren't volatile. And then we had to bring in fans to ventilate. We had to make sure everyone had respirators. And of course, you had other contractors were going down and trying to do work, and they weren't protected at all, and they were just really putting themselves in harm's way. So we had to advise the building people not to allow that, because obviously at the end of the day, they are responsible for it. And it was a few days before we could ventilate to even begin to do work. And then you had tremendous slip problems. With all that oil mixed with water, it was like an ice skating rink. That I didn't anticipate either. The basement, the power, it wasn't that the water filled up the basements. It came in surge and knocked walls down. We had cinder block walls that were just torn down, places turned upside down. Some of these basements looked like a bomb hit went off. And that surprised me too, the actual force. So you had to make things safe, you had to clear out, you had to take some of these walls down, you had to take some of the ceilings down. It was just before you could even do any type of remediation work. And those are the things that I did not anticipate and really surprised me. Let alone then afterwards, it became a tourist attraction, and you had double-decker buses coming down loaded with tourists, blocking Water Street, so equipment and men couldn't get to the jobs. It would block traffic from Wall Street all the way to West Street. That was a nightmare. That was a big surprise.
Right. Anybody else with unprecedented challenges we faced during the storm?
One of the first challenges that we've seen on the labor perspective, obviously as many of you had to deal with as first responders, is to be able to make sure your family is okay, and then be able to go to the affected areas and assess the situation, as well as in locations like Far Rockaway, Staten Island, but mainly as well downtown Manhattan. So right away, our leadership called upon us to do so right after the storm. You know, Wednesday morning, boots on the ground, downtown Manhattan, building to building, management to management, And what we seen was obviously the devastation, the chaos, having no power, no light, and trying to address these environmental issues created, and that was really, something else to see. As you see national disaster companies coming in, setting up trailers, just throwing shirts to workers, to come into the site and start the first response. Definitely for us, that was the first challenge, that it was to assess this and to start, addressing it and thinking to ensure that this work is being done safe,
Yeah, I could add a few things. First off, again, my name's Dan Zerilli. I'm with the mayor's office. When the storm hit, I was working actually with the New York City Economic Development Corporation, and we were heavily engaged in storm response on our maritime properties. And first and foremost, I certainly wasn't surprised by this, but it was an incredible showing by the contractor community that actually came out and began help. I saw it firsthand in the maritime community with the barges and the tugboats that came out. Certainly with the environmental community. It was really amazing to see New York pull together in such a way, and not surprised at all, but still heartened to see that sort of behavior in New York City, and I thank you all for being part of that. Really, I think when it comes down to the unprecedented nature of the challenge, we've learned a lot about Sandy. Now that I've moved into this role in the mayor's office as director of resiliency, we've learned a lot from Sandy about how we can respond to these sort of events. The mayor, of course, has put out an after-action plan with how do we best respond to the emergency events, and of course in June released our resiliency plan on how we can make our city stronger. Generally what we learned is, Sandy was such a huge water event. It was the water levels that we saw in Lower Manhattan were 40% higher than the previous record. Blew all the previous records away in terms of water level. We saw the destructive nature of the wave impact hitting homes and what that meant for the continuing rebuild and mold problems in the outer boroughs. Was just completely unprecedented, and the way that the community came together was just, I wanted to first start off by saying, it was unprecedented and amazing, and thank you for that.
Great. And Gary, how about you? Any challenges or surprises during the storm?
Well, personally, I was a victim.
I see.
And I had, water levels in my home that caused us to actually have to remove all the electric panel, all surfaces, had to change plumbing, heating, hot water, and it is an impact. And what I will be discussing in a few minutes is what do we do about being prepared? How does a company, how does an individual, how does a small company, how does a large company actually put together a plan to mitigate and work through any type of either a disaster or occurrence that can negatively affect what you are, who you are, what you do.
Great. So actually, I'll pose the next question to Chief Tobin of the New York City Fire Department. And the next question is, how were your operations affected, and what were some of the logistical issues presented?
Okay. First, I want to open up with it's probably a little bit of chest beating on the part of the fire department, but I'm going to quote Commissioner Cassano, that no group did more to get this region back on its feet than the FDNY, and it's an absolutely true statement. Nobody in the city government was more prepared, more resilient, more adaptive than the New York City Fire Department. Before the storm, just before the storm last year, we had this same conference, and I sat right here, and I remember speaking to people, and I said, this is a city that is the most resilient city in the world. I'm amazed at New York City. But it's also a city with unprecedented demands on government. And there's no question, if you study public administration, no matter where you go, I studied it at Columbia University, which is supposed to be one of the elite. And the biggest thing in public administration today is that as they teach managing, you need to have a partnership. City government does not have the ability to do this stuff by itself, particularly now. The fire department is so stressed. I'm going to give you some of the stats about what happened with the fire department. 3 days before before this event came, the fire department instituted AUC 159, which is our contingency plan for storms hitting the city of New York. We put 400 additional firemen on rigs throughout the city to bring the manpower up. We instituted the incident management team, which is run by the New York City Fire Department. It is the premier incident management team in the United States. There is not an agency in the country, other than the Forest Service that taught us, that can do what we do at these events. Nobody in the city does what we can do. Our incident management team, it stayed on 60 days after the storm, coordinating the activities of the National Guard and everybody else. We were the only ones with that ability. We could produce maps, we could produce everything every day. We've had people work round the clock. A lot of our people who were working, at the same time, their houses were burned down. We had an unprecedented demand on the fire. We had, in Breezy Point, we lost over 100 houses in a conflagration. You don't see conflagrations like that in the United States since the early 20th century and into the 1890s. Whole neighborhood burned to the ground. And we couldn't even get in there because the water was 3 feet deep. Our rigs were hit with a wall of water. When they got in there were no hydrants. They were drafting salt water. The damage to our apparatus was incredible. We had numerous apparatus damaged by salt water. We had numerous chief cars knocked out by salt water. We had fire department quarters knocked out by salt water. We had EMS stations knocked out by salt water. And on top of that, when you talk about damage, we lost the largest trauma center in the United States. We lost Bellevue Hospital. And when we would go to meetings, and the chief medical officer on the fire department was saying, we don't care what happens, Bellevue has to get back online. And when we talk about pumping water, I think there was over 100 million gallons of water in the basements of the complex at Bellevue. It was knocked out for weeks and weeks and weeks. And if you look at the map of hospitals in New York, once St. Vincent's was gone, you go down to the east side, Langone Medical Center was knocked out, Bellevue was knocked out. You come around, there's not another hospital till you hit Roosevelt. So this was critical, and we had our people working round the clock, pumping and helping with that. We had the tubes, the actual tunnels were knocked out. They were flooded. The fire department was pumping them. Meanwhile, the fire department was responding to fires throughout there, multiple alarm fire up in the Bronx at City Island. And we faced the possibility of our rigs actually being cut off from the mainland because of the surge up there. Long Island Sound looked like the North Atlantic. When you see the old movies, Victory at Sea, Long Island Sound looked like a storm in the North Atlantic. It was incredible. We never saw anything like this. And we adapt all the time. I don't think there's ever, in the New York City Fire Department, I've been doing this for almost 36 years in New York, there's never a day where you can walk into the firehouse and say it's just going to be a routine day because you don't know what the hell the routine is going to be. You adapt and you overcome. In this particular case, we were very, very successful at that. Among the things we did, we helped to clear roadways. We dewatered buildings, including Bellevue Hospital. Our IMT team coordinated multiple city, state, and federal agencies. They took part in rescue and recovery. They continued to operate for weeks after the storm. We responded to 5,000 calls for medical assistance on the first day of this program, at that evening. We had the teams that we put into place after the storm. We had dewatering teams. We had fire and debris removal teams. We had to dewater the path tube. We had to dewater Bellevue. We had to work with the National Guard. We had chainsaw teams that operated throughout the city for 12 days working with OEM, removing trees that had blocked major streets and all. We had fires throughout the city. We had problems with civilians requiring rescue. We had flooded conditions that hindered our response. Like I said, our apparatus pulled in and was hit by 3 foot of water. They don't have wading pipes on them. They stall out when they hit this. We managed to get through that. We had buildings undermined and in danger of collapse. All of these basements that were flooded, don't forget, a lot of these buildings are old. The concrete and the cement that's used in them, it became porous. These buildings were very unstable. We had damaged facades, we had damaged marquees, damaged cornices, cell phone sites were knocked out. We had a loss of electrical power, and something that never happened to us before, all through Lower Manhattan, those high-rise office buildings, all the panels for their fire alarm systems and everything, they're down in the basements. We lost all the fire alarm systems in Lower Manhattan. We had major, major buildings that had to come back online with no fire alarm systems. At the same time, we're sitting there saying, how do we open these buildings? They don't have a fire alarm system. Yet, if we don't open these buildings and we leave these businesses out, they're going to die. Because the business can only stay shut for so long, right? We had to get the buildings occupied again. We worked round the clock, writing variances, putting fire guards in place. We expedited the recovery process. We sent people out to look at panels, see what could be done. We worked hand in hand with the alarm industry. We also had to work with the elevator industry. We had elevators, all these elevators, everything was knocked out. What we rely on when we hit a high-rise building, all of the infrastructure was knocked out. And we worked round the clock. Not only that, the city faced a major fuel supply. Remember, you couldn't get gas. And guess what was hit? Port Mobile was hit. And over at Port Mobile, their fire alarm system was knocked out, and their pumping system for their foam system was knocked out. Under normal conditions, they can't operate, but because of the emergency, we developed a contingency plan with them. We sent fire units there. We had fire units with a foam supply. We had fire units hooked up to hydrants, and with our people standing by, we were able to run Port Mobile and get gasoline throughout the city, which was a major accomplishment. The list goes on and on of the challenges and the way the fire department adapted and overcome. But in the aftermath of the storm, I want you to know that the fire department maintained its IMT team for 60 days coordinating agency efforts. The prevention worked around the clock writing variances to expedite fuel delivery, recovery from major oil plants, Staten Island terminal, the fire alarm systems, and everything else. Numerous fire department apparatus were placed out of service due to the storm. When you expose wires to salt, you're in trouble. Everybody knows you buy a car and you think you got a great buy and you find out it was a flood car, it's nothing but a problem. A lot of our rigs have had nothing but problems since this storm. We've had ambulances damaged, fire trucks damaged, like I said, chief's cars. We had fire department station houses that were completely destroyed. We had a fireboat quarters, brand new fireboat quarters, on the river here that was almost destroyed. Numerous stations out of service. Fire alarm systems and elevators knocked out in every major high-rise building in the surge area. We also had contamination. And this was the big issue for us, where last year I said there's no question in the fire department's mind that the ECA is a valuable asset that the city needs and that the fire department relies on. The fire department, we're there to protect life and property in an emergency situation, and that's it. Once the emergency is over, we don't have the manpower or the time to sit there and remediate mold. And parts of Staten Island, it smelled like an open latrine because there was raw sewage all around there. Firemen do not clean up raw sewage. We will get the people out of it, but we don't clean it up. Somebody has to clean it up. And you have to have people that are licensed and are going to do the right thing. Not like 30 years ago when I came on the fire department and I told you we would go to a rubbish fire in Hunts Point and find bags of asbestos and other stuff while people were taking PCBs and mixing it into fuel oil and burning it off. You need to have people that the city licenses. You need to have people that we can rely on. But the bottom line is the fire department is an emergency service that cannot do this remediation. This time we reached out. We did as best we could. But we have a city of 8 million people to protect. So I really know that I speak for the fire department when I say that this organization, the Environmental Contractors Association, the things that you're fighting for, to have people certified and everything, we support it 100%, and we see you as one of the most valuable allies we have in the city.
Great. Thank you, Chief Tobin. Appreciate it. I'll pose the next question to Mr. Daniel Zerilli, the Mayor's Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability. So, Daniel, did the large volume of work that resulted from the disaster skew any pre-developed plans?
That's an interesting question. I think in a lot of ways, the city, when you think about the city's development of the waterfront over the last 10, 12 years, it's been about bringing people to the waterfront. It's been about developing our waterfront properties, and whether it's for parkland, whether it's for increased residential or commercial uses, it's been about activating the waterfront. It's really been thought of as our fifth borough, or sixth borough in a lot of ways. And of course, when the storm hits, much of the city was flooded. I think a lot of people rightly pointed out that the flood zones roughly matched the original shoreline of Lower Manhattan, and it was much of the area that had been filled in over the years, over the last 4 centuries, that was flooded. But there were some interesting lessons that we drew from the storm, is that And I think it really boils down to a simple concept that building codes worked. And much of the new development that had been put in place in the last 20 years, since the floodplains were adopted into the building code, generally fared just fine. If you look at Battery Park City, if you look at the new developments on the Brooklyn-Queens waterfront in Williamsburg, places like Irvine by the Sea out in the Rockaways, the flood elevations had been built into the building code, and those properties generally fared well during the storm. And so I think the lesson that we learned is there is a smart way, there's very much a resilient way to engage with the waterfront, and we don't see it as undermining the rationale for 12 years of policy work and in large ways a lot of construction work around the city to bring people to the waterfront, to reactivate the waterfront, to clean up decades of underinvestment and decay on the waterfront. We've really turned that around, and we don't see that as something that needs to be turned off. Instead, I think the mayor has rightly put out a plan that shows that we can smartly engage with the waterfront. We've released a plan with 257, everyone likes that number, 257 initiatives of how we're going to make our city stronger and more resilient. And a big part of that is that we do not intend to run away from the waterfront, but instead we intend to be smarter about how we engage with the waterfront, cognizant of the risk that we do face. And I think it's important to talk about what those risks are. Sandy was an event, a unique event in its own right. It was idiosyncratic in some ways about how the storm took a certain track and took that famous left hook into New Jersey, and resulted in unprecedented levels of flooding. But the risks from climate change are more than just maybe there's another Sandy coming around the corner. The risks of climate change that could impact us are broader than that. Coastal storms certainly are a continuing risk in the city, but so is sea level rise, where 8% of our shoreline by the 2050s can expect to be flooded on a daily basis, just due to sea level rise alone. We face risks from increased precipitation. We face risks from increased drought in this city, and all of that combines to illustrate some of the things that we need to be protecting against in the future. And that, I think, opens up the opportunity for a lot of interesting work that's going to be coming down the pike that probably is going to be of particular interest to this community and much of the contracting community in the city. Some of the projects that we're already working on, we've basically laid out an approach for making our city more resilient in a multiple lines of defense approach, where we intend to improve our coastline to defend against coastal storms, but acknowledging that we can't stop all the risks that that face us just on the coastline. We also intend to upgrade our buildings. The mayor signed into law 6 pieces of legislation yesterday to upgrade the building code and to improve resiliency in the city. There are more of those working their way through the city council right now. So we intend to upgrade our existing building code, basically learning the lesson that the building code can work, but it's our existing buildings that aren't quite up to that full code yet. And protecting our infrastructure, and whether it's working with Con Ed to improve its resiliency on critical substations, whether it's working to improve our water and wastewater systems, there's a full range of infrastructure work that also is coming down the pike. And so the plan, I think there's another interesting point, I guess, for the audience is, the plan that the mayor laid out is basically a $20 billion plan over the next 10 years. And so this is resiliency work only. And much of that is funded. We have $10 billion already in hand. Some of that is city capital. Some of that is the federal funds that are coming into the region. And another maybe 5 is expected in future either allocations from the federal government. Some of those funds are coming through utilities. And so there is a huge body of work that's sort of bubbling up and developing at this point in terms of, work in improving our coastline, improving our buildings, and continuing to make our city stronger and more resilient.
All right, great. Thank you very much. I'll pose the next question to Gary DiPaolo, Structure Tone. So Gary, mold became a huge issue after the storm. Based on your experience, how can mold be addressed in the future? Or maybe Morris wants to take that?
Well, mold, you're not going to stop mold from happening. If you're going to have water, you're going to have mold. The best way to prevent mold from happening is to address the water situation immediately, dry it. If there's any type of walls that are like sheetrock walls, if they're saturated, they need to be removed. Because the longer you wait, the worse your mold problem is going to be. and you have maybe a window of a few days, and then mold is going to start to form. So I think anytime there's a water situation, you have to always keep that in mind, and it's imperative that the water gets pumped out and the area gets dried immediately.
Right.
I know the problem is a lot of times with the insurance companies, they don't want you to do anything until they come down and inspect. By the time they come down and inspect, you have a mold problem.
Exactly. By then it's too late.
Exactly.
And a lot of times, we want to get in there and do emergency response very quickly and then restart building, but there's a number of steps, and mold is one that's often overlooked because you can't see it. So a lot of times we go and rebuild, but meanwhile there could be mold spores trapped within a wall cavity, and then after you reoccupy the space, mold could make itself visible. So it's definitely a problem that's sometimes overlooked, which is why we're writing a white paper on it and present that probably next spring. So anybody? Okay, next question for the panel. What were your observations on the order of operations that took place during the recovery? You want to take that? How about safety first and environmental, maybe?
Well, pretty much so. We had all our equipment in the city, which first I had to move because Canal Street, I had all my equipment on Canal Street, and as the waters were coming up, I had to move everything to 6th Avenue, otherwise I'd have lost everything. And when we came on sites, obviously we went downstairs to make an assessment, and one, I noticed the tremendous destruction. Walls were down, ceilings were down, everything was turned upside down. Obviously, well, the power was out, but we had to make sure, we had to look for that because standing water electric never go together.
Right.
So you had a safety issue there. Then we had a safety issue with the field. I mean, I didn't know if the place was going to blow up. People couldn't get in because of the levels were so high, you just couldn't breathe the air. So you had to vent, you had to do all this preparation before you could even begin to work. Then you had to identify areas that needed to be addressed first. Building, we want you perhaps to get the elevator areas cleaned. So it was all that coordination. We had to bring in generators, special equipment, special pumps. Then we needed to bring in vac trucks to skim oil in a lot of situations. So there was a lot of prep before you could even get in to do work. In some situations, a couple of weeks worth of work before we could actually get in and really start doing remediation.
Sure. Does anybody else in the panel experience?
So what actually happens is a cognitive thinking process that many of us take for granted. And I like to engage everyone here with some of the systems thinking. Systems thinking is a process whereby you start with a concept and you look at the end. When you look at the end, you've got to identify what are the critical pieces to get to that end. And the only way to do it is to have a business continuity plan. Now, a business continuity plan has a number of components, but there is a difference between a personal continuity plan and a business continuity plan. It affects all of us. Who can give me an example of something that would affect your normal operations as an organization or normal operations in your personal life? An example from something.
Your phones are down.
Your phones are down. God forbid. The telephones don't work anymore. What else? People can't get to work. Transportation issues. What about a simple burglary in one of your offices? That will impact your normal operations. What else could it be?
No gas.
Okay? Gas. No gas. An electrical outage in a specific area or in your own home. What about IT functions within an organization? Anyone else?
Contamination, not complete process.
Contamination afterwards. Exactly. So organizations have to plan. Bob Abitroni alluded to planning and some of the issues with planning. So we have to have a document, whether it's a personal document for your home or a business document. And it has essentially 4 components. The components are prevention, preparedness, response, and of course recovery. Now, it depends on how your business will operate as far as how long it takes to do what you need to do. And with systems thinking, and look it up because it's a very interesting cognitive process. When you identify an issue and you resolve that issue, that part of the critical path, resolving that issue creates another problem that you have to think more to resolve. So, no matter what, we involve people, we involve the process that we do, or our plan, our actual location, whether it is a building, our home, and then of course, the technology part of it. And technology, and lack of technology, can cause an operation to actually go downhill very, very quickly. So let's think about it. What are some of the issues that would concern you? We talked about a fire, a flood, burglary, an environmental exposure, whether it's a gas main that would explode. But what are some of the other issues that would personally affect everyone or anyone in this room and have a process to address it? No one? No water. No water, exactly, no water. What if you had no drinking water in your house? What if you were a caretaker for someone who had some specific illness or condition that would cause trauma, an interruption of your normal circumstances because you had no electricity, because you had no water? What about a simple flu breakout in your office, where maybe you have 15 to 20 people and 10, 12 people come down with the flu simultaneously? Forget about a pandemic for a second. It'll impact how you do business. So, what you heard Bob say in the beginning, and what you are hearing from the panel here this morning, please give it very serious thought and put together some sort of written document that will allow you to function and recover as quickly as possible. And take the time to look up what systems thinking is all about, because it is a very active and positive way to approach an issue, to approach a condition or an event that will truly impact how you operate as a person or as an organization.
Great. Thanks. Chief Tobin?
Yeah, can I just say something that I actually served on the committee. I was on the oversight committee. The fire department put together what we call it a COOP. When you talk to industry, that's what they call this. They call it a COOP. It's a continuity of operations planning, and they commonly refer to it as a COOP. And basically what they do is just that. They lay out, you have to brainstorm these things. You have to sit down with a group of people, and you have to decide what are all the potential things that could floor your business. And then you have to determine what your needs are to keep that business running. And we did that with the fire department, and it wound up to be quite an extensive document that we came up with. And one of the key paths, like he said, in that is you have to develop, and this goes back to Hyman Rickover, who built the nuclear submarines. He built what he called a critical path analysis. If you're going to build a building, you got to start with the foundation. And once the foundation is done, what is the next critical step for you to do? And you move through till you get to your goal. And you have to identify all those things. And you have to make sure you have the pieces in place to implement them. For instance, like he said, we lose if there's something happened at fire department headquarters. We were very concerned about terrorism. But it also didn't have to be terrorism. We just saw it could have been a major storm that would have knocked out all our power. How will we run our IT? Fire department is very, very dependent on the IT staff in the building. We share all our data with the city agencies through that. If that gets knocked up, where's our backup center for that? We had to take all that stuff into consideration. We had to take into consideration that we'd lose our communication center. What would happen there? We worked on this stuff, and it came to definitely came to play after this event, that businesses that had a COOP in place, that they knew what to do step by step by step, and they had a team standing by that they could bring in, they recovered. Those businesses that didn't have it were running around looking for somebody to do it for them, and it wasn't an easy task, I think, to find somebody. And in many cases, they were coming to, like, the city. How do you do this? And the city was overwhelmed. So it's incumbent upon the industry to realize that there's obligations they have. One of the biggest things is if you want to survive, you have to have a coop. There's no question.
And think about what Chief Tobin just said. And forget about a disaster occurring. We have to work as general industry, private sector, along with the government and facilities we have here in the city of New York. And the best example I can give as far as prevention is concerned is a project that we're doing here at Structure Tone in the city of New York. Before we started the job, we spoke to Chief Tobin. He came to the project, and we identified some of the life safety issues that we were very concerned about prior to even start of any of the construction at the site. And take advantage of the fact that you have people who know and understand what the systems are in the city of New York, procedures in the city of New York, and we work with Chief Tobin to put together a plan, because it was a life safety plan based on a building that did not conform to current codes. So that prevention and pre-thinking actually assisted our organization, and we work very closely with the fire department and the building department to have a successful start to what will be, on completion, a successful project. And Chief Tobin, thank you for your assistance.
I think it just reinforces the fact that city government has to have partnerships with people in the industry. City government does not have the ability to do this stuff by itself. And you have to reach out to people. We have a great relationship with Structure Tone. We have an absolutely fantastic relationship with the Building Trade Employers Association, Lou Coletti's group. That's how I met Joyce through the BTEA, and we developed a relationship with the Environmental Contractors Association. We've reached out, we've developed relationships with Columbia University to bring in resources that we didn't have to train our people, to train our management staff. We reached out to the United States Forest Service to develop a relationship with them to train our incident management team. That's why if you go throughout the fire service and you ask anybody, the New York City Fire Department has the premier incident management team in the United States. Nobody can hold a candle to us. Nobody. Because what we did in Hurricane Sandy, I will stand by the commissioner's thing, nobody carried more of a lion's share than the fire department. A lot of work behind the scenes was done. But it was because we spent that time with the Fire Officers Management Institute, with the recognition after 9/11, what happened there, that we have to plan for all hazards. And the fire department truly does plan for all hazards, and I think businesses have to take that into consideration. There's not just the terrorist threat. There's the simple thing, look what a storm can do to your business. There were businesses knocked out for months in Lower Manhattan. If you went by 55 Water Street, anybody who works down there, did you see those huge generators and everything? They had no electricity. They were running off of generators for months and months and months. So, and this thing here, mold. We've had mold issues, Bob knows that. We had major steam pipe explosion the last time we talked about the steam pipe explosion. After the emergency was over, there were buildings that couldn't be occupied for weeks and weeks and weeks because they were loaded with mold, because steam produces moisture. Every time you get a fire in a building, we put water on it and heat, you got moisture. You're going to have mold in that building. The fire department does not clean up mold. We save the people, we put the fire out, we pack up our trucks, and we go to the next fire. We don't hang around to do this stuff. You've got to have plans for it.
We in Local 78 represent around 4,000 environmental, asbestos-led, hazardous waste, mold remediators, workers. And talking this morning with my business manager, one of the things he wanted me to mention is how proud we are for the partnership we have developed with the Environmental Contractors Association. And in many instances, I mean, it's really hard to have a plan for these disasters, you know, but we were there responding after 9/11. We were there in 42nd and Lexington. We were there in the anthrax threat, and we were definitely there right after Sandy. And it's definitely a challenge that is hard to prepare for, but you got to be ready and have the willingness to work with these partnerships, private, public sector. Definitely this industry, you know, there's a lot of work we need to do because you know, regarding like per se mold or water damage, there's really no laws, there's guidelines on how you do this. So this exposes and opens a door for a lot of unscrupulous contractors or national disasters companies to take advantage of that and abuse workers. And we have many cases because we represent both workers in both states. in New Jersey and New York that even our public buildings, schools, Board of Education, everything is being cleaned by untrained labor for work temp agencies, day laborers, which is unfair to them, getting paid low wages for dealing with these environmental hazards, things that are toxic, that will create serious harm to your health. So just wanted to share that, and definitely, we're very proud to be part of this community. And one of the things we're working on our own to establish ALA is that partnership with our communities in these affected areas, in partnership with public entities and entities in the private sector, for us to be able to be ready and deploy and do it again if we have to.
Great. All right, thank you very much, everyone, for participating in the panel, and thanks for being part of our discussion.
I now have the pleasure of welcoming Lou Coletti, President and CEO of the Building Trades Employers Association since 1997. The BTA is the nation's largest contractor organization, representing 27 contractors associations and 1,800 union construction managers, general contractors, and subcontractors in New York City. Lou is responsible for leading the New York City construction industry's strategy and efforts in the areas of economic development, governmental affairs, construction safety, workforce development, and labor relations coordination. Please join me in welcoming Lou Coletti.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Karen, and thank you to the Environmental Contractors Association for the opportunity to address you this morning. It's great to be back here again. First of all, I want to congratulate you. Both the ECA as an association and the individual contractors who participated in the Sandy cleanup. You did a really great job. You had, I think, a better model than the rest of the cleanup by operating with, was it the LISC? You probably had one of the better contracts. What I'd like to talk about this morning a little bit is the role the BTA played in the Sandy hurricane, and maybe talk about some of the lessons learned when you step back from it. About 4 or 5 days after the hurricane, I got a call from Mayor Bloomberg. And he said, has anybody reached out to you yet? And I said, no. And he said, well, you need to be in City Hall for a meeting with Kaz Holloway and FEMA. And so we went down there and began to talk about how we were going to approach this cleanup, separate from the part what you had done. You had already started your cleanup. So we began to strategize, and next thing I knew that the BTA office was the call center for 311. So you can imagine my staff was a little overwhelmed as people were calling in, registering to get FEMA aid. We finally separated that piece out, and what the BTA became is we had a lot of calls from local contractors who wanted to participate in the cleanup. So we created a website. We asked 4 or 5 simplistic questions. Are you a union contractor? What locally you signed with? What kind of work do you want to do? And we then coordinated with the Small Business Services in order to try to funnel those contractors as well as the BTA members to the 6 general contractors who were selected. We were involved working with Catherine Mallon in terms of trying to develop a document and how we were going to approach it. The first meeting, I will tell you, was I guess interesting is the best word, when I said, well, if you want us to help get at least general contractors to submit, I have some questions for you. Are you going to indemnify them? We don't know. How are they going to get paid? Unit cost, time and material? We don't know. How often are they going to get paid? We don't know. So I said to the FEMA people, well, I don't know how to tell you. It's kind of hard for me to help you unless I have answers to those questions. They talked about bringing 4 or 5 project managers, they called them, that they had on retainer on an emergency list into New York City, and I said to him, I really don't think that's a good idea. I said, what you need are CMs and GCs that have relationships with their subcontractors where they can tell them, stop doing that work over there and get over here. So we worked through those issues. And let me say something about the city's position in Kaz Holloway, who you're going to hear from later. I don't think people really understand. I mean, the personal toll is obviously enormous, and people are still suffering. But I don't think people have a real appreciation for the depth of the task that had to be completed within the time frame that it had to be completed in. It was enormous. And people like Kaz, I mean, thank God Kaz was there. You had a point of accountability. He brought all the agencies together. He brought the private sector together. He brought labor to the table. I don't know where we would have been. We'd still be probably sitting around trying to figure out how to get some of it done if it wasn't for Kaz Holloway's direction and Catherine Mallon. I have to tell you, Catherine's a tough lady. But she knows what she's doing. She structured it. I'm trying to eat Thanksgiving dinner, and she's calling me saying, well, how about this and this issue? We're going to put an RFP out. Can you get people to bid? So I think what we have to do going forward, and I was fortunate in chairing the task force by the New York Building Congress that took a look at some of these issues. We now have the experience, and I have the personal experience now of being involved in two cleanups, 9/11 and Sandy. And I think we need to take a look at what worked and what didn't work. One of the things that struck me about the contractors who participated in the Sandy cleanup is they were virtually none of the same contractors that participated in the 9/11 cleanup. Why? No indemnification. Payment issues. And that's not necessarily the city's fault. The FEMA requirements are very different than what the city's payment requirements are. And in fact, to Kaz's credit, as we were having one of these pretty frustrating meetings with him, he didn't say anything to me. All I knew was at the next meeting, FEMA wasn't at the table. And we proceeded. But some of the complications when you actually got to the sites were the city had one system for submitting invoices. FEMA had a completely different system. All of the contractors involved had a completely different system. I went the other day and I saw Gilbane has bought a building that's filled with cartons of paperwork, 750 cartons of paperwork, and they're still trying to get their way through. And now what happens is there was supposed to be some tax credits, and now the state auditors come in and say, well, what's in this line item? Well, the income, the tax exemption. Oh, no, you can't do it that way, therefore you're not getting reimbursed for it. So I really think we need to take a look at what worked and what didn't work. The strategy worked. It was the same strategy that you had at 9/11. Let's break it into 6 geographical areas. I'm telling you, on the building side, it was like pulling teeth to get people to even submit a proposal. Those companies that were involved in 9/11 wanted no part of it. And if you now talk to the heavy and civil guys that participated, they're going to tell you, never again. Subcontractors are telling me, never again. So we have to get our arms around this process and have a standalone, a standard contract, standard pre-qualified list of contractors, so that the city, I mean, think about it. You're in an emergency situation and Catherine had to worry about putting out an RFP? That's ridiculous. You lost 3 or 4 or 5 days in that process because it had to be transparent. Well, you can set up those transparent systems and have them on board and say, oh, we have an emergency, company X, let's go. I want a bid from you, I want a bid for you. And that's the best way to respond, I think, both from the standpoint of those who are affected by any tragedy or cleanup operation and for the industry. Because I can tell you right now, the industry is walking on eggs. God forbid any other tragedy is going to happen. I don't know where the contractors are going to come from to do the work. I don't have to tell you, you're in the business. This is a tough business. We're just coming out of the worst recession since the Depression. Cash flow is horrible. Profit margins, what's that? And now you're going to be asked to respond to an emergency, wait for your payments, and then be questioned on every little line item that you have. If we don't make major reforms in this area, I think we're headed down a really terrible road. So I think we learned a lot. One of the issues that we had, a very significant issue for the city, was MWBE participation in this cleanup effort. Kaz sent me to a meeting with several MWBE representatives who were saying things like, well, there's a 20% goal and everything like this. And I said, listen, I don't know how to tell you this. This is an emergency. Okay? But what we were able to do by the BTA identifying its MWBE companies and every day giving those lists, making telephone calls, working with small business services to make sure that those general contractors had those lists of MWBE firms, Kaz has told me that I think we ended up with 23 to 25% participation. Honestly, when I met with those individuals, I said to them, if I were you and I was a small contractor, I would think twice about going after this work, because you may not be around. Understand you're not going to get paid for 6 to 9 months. We have no idea what the insurance coverage is going to be. So if you're a small contractor, you really need to be careful in making a business judgment. We're happy that you want to be involved, but understand the implications for your business. But there were a lot of good things that came out of this process, but people have to understand, again, how difficult it was and complex from the city's perspective, trying to get the industry organized, trying to make sure the processes were going to meet transparency and legal requirements, making sure the work actually got done. So I think the city has a lot to be proud of, and it's unfortunate. I'd get these calls from the press when everybody was attacking the city, and they never put my comments in, because I guess when you say something good, they never want to give anybody any credit. But they did, and Kaz did a remark, and Catherine did. They just did a remarkable job, as did the BTA membership in terms of moving the cleanup ahead and letting people get back to their normal lives. So I think in the end, what we really need to do is to take a look at what was good, take a look at what we think can be improved, and make them standard procedures. So God forbid the next time occurs, we're not wasting time. We know who to go to, we know how you're going to get paid, we know when you're going to get paid, we know what the rules of the game are. It enhances everybody. And I keep telling people, especially people outside of this region, okay, thank God that New York City is as organized in a union construction method as it is. Think if you're in a different city. Think about the task of trying to find abatement contractors, trying to find electrical contractors, where there's no place for them to go. Here, the mayor makes 2 phone calls. One to Gary LaBarber, one to me. We sit at the table. You had already been contacted. You're already in the field working. They know where to get the contractors that they need for the cleanup. I've been out in Chicago the last couple weeks, and they're struggling with the structure of their industry, marveling at the fact that the BTA has every trade contractor under its umbrella. They don't even talk to each other. They have no idea what's going on in the industry. If something, God forbid, should happen in Chicago, they have no way of knowing how to coordinate a response. So in that way, in New York City, I think we're lucky. And that we're lucky that despite whatever differences we may have, when it comes to something tragic like this, we all put those differences aside and we get it done. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity of carrying out some of the implementation and recommendations that we came up with in the Building Congress report. I can only talk about my section, which was really focused on process and contractors. So I don't know, do I have time for any questions? Joyce, I'm done. No? I'd be glad to entertain any questions that you may have. But again, thank you very much for the opportunity. I think what the Chief Tobin said about, I appreciate the comments he made about the BTA. It's very important. We have a monthly safety committee where the fire department, the buildings department, and OSHA, subcontractors and general contractors meet every week. Chief Tobin comes in with his report, okay? We take a look at who the bad actors are and who's getting them violations. And if there are members, we try to deal with them. It's a very, very important committee. There's nothing more important in this industry than safety. And I want to thank Chief Tobin, especially for the fire department's cooperation, and OSHA and the buildings department. And we're going to continue that in the new administration, as well as some other recommendations that we're going to be making to a new mayor. So thank you very much. I'll take any questions anybody has. Okay, thank you.
I'm just going to introduce Brad Gear, who we are running as moderator to the second panel. Brad obviously is a great resource to the city. He came to us post 9/11 from FEMA, dealt with 9/11 with us, came, served the Bloomberg administration, went back in the private sector, and was called on to come back and do housing recovery, and has done a remarkable job. So we're pleased to have Brad.
Thank you, Bob. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our second panel. We're going to be right on time because you've heard the name Deputy Mayor Kaz Holloway mentioned a number of times, and he's going to be speaking later, and most importantly, he's my boss, so when Kaz gets here, the panel is over. So we'll try to be as brief yet informative as possible. I think I'd like to just very quickly start with asking the panel members to introduce themselves, explain who they are, what their title is, and what their organization does, and then we'll get into some discussion. So start with Dick.
I'm Dick Anderson, President, New York Building Congress. The Building Congress was set up in 1921 to be the umbrella organization for the design, construction, and real estate industry in New York City.
My name is Brian Fricklin. I'm the VP of Communications for Flood Control America. FCA designs and supplies temporary removable flood walls. These consist of aluminum planks that drop into vertical steel posts and are bolted to embedded steel plates, which essentially, when the system is demounted, makes for an invisible system. But when erected, can be large-scale flood wall that basically dry flood proofs everything that it protects and everything inside.
Good morning, I'm Denise Scott. I work with the Local Initiative Support Corporation. I manage the New York City program. We are a national organization created for New York City in response to Superstorm Sandy under the banner of the Neighborhood Revitalization NYC, a program to treat mold in partnership with ECA and others.
Good morning, I'm Geraldine Sweeney, Chief Strategy Advisor at the Mayor's Office of Operations. At the Mayor's Office of Operations, we oversee the daily operations of city agencies and coordinate large-scale city initiatives.
Good morning, my name is Stephen Pirvalikas. I'm the Safety Director for Structure Tone, and we are general contractors.
I'm Mike Gilson, an Assistant Commissioner for the Bureau of Environmental Compliance at the Department of Environmental Protection. We are the regulators for asbestos, air, noise, and boiler permitting in New York City.
I'm Bob Avalotroni. I'm the advisor consultant to the ECA and former deputy commissioner at DEP.
Okay, thank you very much.
My former boss.
Absolutely. Thank you. We've got a great panel, a lot of diverse experience here, and what we want to do is hit on a number of topics, so we'll jump right in. And Bob, I'm going to start with you because I want to come back to something that you mentioned in your opening remarks. We've had a number of large-scale incidents the last decade plus in New York City. World Trade Center, steam pipe explosion, the Deutsche Bank, Hurricane Sandy, and others. And as you mentioned, they all have environmental components. And I don't know, maybe it is the case, but is there an environmental plan out there, an environmental emergency response plan out there that can help guide our efforts, or should there be one? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Brad, thank you. Obviously, the city, as I alluded to before, has a citywide incident management system. Mayor Bloomberg signed that into law shortly after taking office, and that's great because it covers the core competencies of every agency. But to answer your question, Brad, I think what we've learned, obviously, through the experiences you just mentioned, and we've been through them together, is that the necessity to have public-private partnerships and to have a plan in place for emergencies is essential because, as I mentioned earlier as well, everything that we seem to deal with has an environmental imprint. We went back to 9/11, that had an environmental imprint, obviously. We talked about the steam pipe explosion and getting back, the area around Grand Central Terminal back up and running. It's economically feasible to get them back as quickly as possible. And to answer your question, the city right now has SIMS, but we do not have a private-public sector dialogue and system in place. But the good news is that we have introduced a plan. The ECA has introduced a plan. In fact, I'm going to say this, that Brad, when he was not in government, we sought Brad out because of his expertise. He helped us write an emergency management plan. And that plan is ready to go, and it speaks to having boots on the ground in case of any eventual emergency that will support, not take the place of, support the various city agencies that do their work. Chief Tobin alluded to before. They do rescue recovery. Once they leave the scene, they're gone. PD would tell you if there's a potential terrorist attack with 9/11, they do their job and they're gone. That's their core competency. DEP has a staff of people. They do a tremendous job, but they need assistance. It's essential for us to have an emergency management plan that's written, it's ready to go. Just like before on the panel before, the ECA has also put forth legislation that's going to go before the City Council. I expect approval because it would be irresponsible not to have it approved, that you have standards that people are cleaning to the proper level using the proper the technical people that are proficient, protected, because they not only protect themselves when they go in, they protect the public that will reoccupy or the businesses that go back to their locations. To answer your question, Brad, it's written, it's ready to be out there, and we need to move.
Great. Thank you, Bob. I think that's very, very important. I want to go next to Mike Gilson and to talk a little bit about specifically what the New York City Department of Environmental Protection has done and will continue to do as part of their response and recovery from Hurricane Sandy. Mike.
Thank you. My bureau, the Bureau of Environmental Compliance, as I stated before, we're responsible for asbestos, air, noise in the city of New York. So specifically, right after the storm, we had our asbestos investigators out in the neighborhoods just patrolling so that they were there, so they could be seen, so that they could lend hand to anybody who would need it. That would be homeowners, that would be contractors who are out there. In addition to that, we also put up immediately air monitors in different neighborhoods throughout the city to make sure that there wasn't any asbestos in the air. We did that monitoring probably for 3 to 4 months after the incident in neighborhoods and also at the transfer sites. We did that for almost the whole duration of the transfer sites. In addition, we met with the Army Corps of Engineers and we worked on the protocols for the demolition of the buildings because the Army Corps had a different take on how asbestos should be handled than we do it here in New York. So we spent a lot of time with the Army Corps working out how those buildings should be demoed properly, protecting the public and the workers. We also helped out the Rapid Repair Program and the Build It program that Brad is associated with in working out the protocols on how to deal with asbestos there. In addition, there was a lot of trees that came down, and there were a lot of what we called at the time woody debris that had to be disposed of. And the Army Corps of Engineers came in with a proposal to do some air curtain burning that they had done down in Louisiana. And what an air curtain is, it's just a big container that you just put the wood into, and it has blowers, and it keeps it at a high temperature. What we did was we issued a variance to the contractor, not to the Army Corps, to the Army Corps' contractor, that allowed them to burn, because there is no open burning in the city of New York. You're not allowed to burn anything in the city of New York open, and it's also a fire department regulation, so we had to get the fire department to become on board too. So we permitted that. We set up an air monitoring system around the perimeter and in the neighborhoods to make sure that there wasn't any PM 2.5 coming off the curtain. And we did that for probably just about 2 months, when it was decided that the best way to do this was just to continue chipping. So we were involved with that. There's also one else, right? Oh, and then we were also involved with the generator issues downtown New York. There were so many generators that came in. Generators in the city of New York, I'm sure as many of you know, as your contractors here, usually are registered with us for the city. And the reason they're registered is because we just want to make sure that we know where they are, we know where the emission points are, and we have a sense that they're being maintained properly. So what happened in this case was there was such a demand for generators that generators came in from all over the country. Some of those generators weren't working properly, they weren't maintained properly. So we were responding to a lot of complaints from residents and businesses who were trying to move back into their locations, and they were just experiencing tremendous amount of fumes. So what we did was we worked with the companies, we asked them voluntarily, and many of them did it. They brought in cleaner generators when they could as they became available. They got rid of the dirtier ones. People moved them. We had to move them around corners. We moved them across the streets. And we also had them register with us. Those that didn't, we gave a grace period, and if they didn't comply and they were just being a bad actor, let's say, we ended up issuing them a violation. But I have to say that the majority of the contractors all came together, they all did the right thing, and it turned out that in the end that the air downtown became better, people lived with the generators, and they were working properly. So those were just some of the things that my bureau did. As an agency, which I can't speak to, we were involved with all the water and sewer operations, obviously. Many of our sewer treatment plants were flooded underwater. There was a tremendous amount of effort in bringing them back up online.
Thank you, Mike. I want to talk a little bit now about mold, and there was a lot of talk about mold immediately after Hurricane Sandy, and not a lot of action initially. So I want to talk about some people who took action, and along with many people in this room, to address that issue. As the Director of Housing Recovery Operations, the mayor appointed me to that position about 5 days after Hurricane Sandy, and mold was already starting to become a big issue. FEMA would not pay for mold removal. They feel it is not an imminent public health and safety hazard, and so it was left to others to try to figure out how to do that. And some of those others that stepped up were the philanthropic community. The Mayor's Fund for the Advancement of New York City came to me a few days after I started and said that they'd raised a lot of money for Hurricane Sandy recovery, and they wanted some ideas on how they could spend it in the area of housing. I gave them a list of 7 different things that I thought were going to be unmet needs, things that there wouldn't be any governmental funding for. And they chose out of that list, I think boldly, because some of the others were a lot sexier and a lot easier to do. They chose mold as their first priority. After they did that, it was just a simple matter of figuring out how to find someone to run that program. I asked my friends at the New York City Housing Preservation Development Department, the commissioner, who he thought might be capable of doing that, and he immediately got Denise Scott from LISC on the line. I spent about 5 minutes explaining to Denise what I wanted to do, and after a long pause, she started to jump right in and figure out how to do it. So I would like to hear from first Denise a little bit about what she did, and then from Geraldine from the mayor's office about how we made it all work in a really unique partnership between a not-for-profit organization and the Mayor's Fund to Advance New York City. So Denise?
Yeah, well, thank you for your leadership, Brad, and also, of course, thank Michael Bloomberg for his leadership. The decision to house so many people in place was a bold decision, and so I think the administration is to be credited for being able to pull it off. In terms of mold, it took some convincing for me to get my board to agree. This is a national board. They've dealt with disasters across the country before, but never having the challenge of really getting inside a house to deal with treating mold. So one of the first big decisions that had to be made, aside from creating the infrastructure inside of LISC, so as some of the previous speakers said, when we finally got on the ground, we didn't have to worry about things like how to get the contractors paid. That was actually the easy part. The biggest part was to make the right decision about who our contracting partners were going to be, and that's obviously where ECA came in. And my conversations with Joyce and all of the other team members and the contractors about exactly what it would take to get this mold treated, and how it was a very difficult challenge to get inside of a home where people still had not mucked out. There's still water, there's still lots of debris, and still lots of emotion around the storm. People had not recovered. So we were really part of the team helping people with the early recovery, having to help people make decisions about what to throw away. And so I think that the partnership between the contractors and the philanthropic community coming together, our community partners, we raised significant money to bring community partners to the table, local community-based organizations who sort of came before the contractors. What they were able to do was to knock on doors and get the families who knew them, who trusted them, to agree to allow us into their homes, and also to help them make those hard decisions about throwing away very precious things, photos and all kinds of other porous material that was important to them, sentimental to them, but was now contaminated with mold. So what we were able to do is to put together this partnership with the philanthropists, with the contractors, constantly in conversation with ECA, with our government partners, and I think that together we were able to be successful. Our goal is to treat 2,000 homes. To date, we have cleaned mold in over 1,600 homes, and I would say the vast majority of those homes were treated by ECA members. So this has been a tremendous partnership. I certainly have learned a lot about mold, more than I think I ever wanted to know before. And for me to be able to go back to the National Board of LISC and to say, hey, we've treated 1,600 homes, no incidences, and the majority, I'd say 99% of the after-work surveying that we did, the homeowners are extremely pleased. So the last point I'll make on this subject is that there were a lot of people who came before us, a lot of contractors who were not qualified to do the work. Many of you who were in the room, in the homes with these families, realized that some of them had actually paid for work that wasn't done properly. So aside from just knowing what to do, the ability of all of us to partner together, our ability to bring speed and high quality to the individual homeowners, and to really hold their hand through the process, I think it's been a special and unique partnership, and I'm looking forward. I think, Brad, this is a model that certainly can be repeated throughout the country.
I think you're right, Denise. I think it is a model, and I just will say that when it started out, I felt like we had kind of a bad blind date going at first, and then it evolved into almost a shotgun wedding between the ECA and LISC, and now it really looks like it is a happily ever after, and it should be a model for what we can do to make this all happen again. And a big part of making that marriage work has been Geraldine and the mayor's office, who really, this was a relationship where the money was going directly from the philanthropic organizations to LISC, but the mayor's office wanted to help facilitate that. And I will say that in addition to the Mayor's Fund for Advancement of New York City, the other two major contributors financially to this were the American Red Cross and the Robin Hood Foundation. They were equal partners, and it was about a $15 million program. So, Geraldine, can we talk a little bit about your role?
Sure. First, I'd like to thank the ECA for this morning's panel and its members. As Denise mentioned, we do have, reports coming from the homeowners how the mold treatment has been working for them. And we've received so many tremendous comments, and it's thanks to your members that we have been so successful, so thank you. So the Mayor's Office of Operations, I think, is unique in the city that what we do is like large-scale initiatives, bringing different folks to the table. So our role was to act as a facilitator, working with the Mayor's Fund, working with Denise's team, working with the New York City Law Department, working with the Health Department, making sure that we could bring all the right partners to the table to make sure that we had a workable framework so that Denise and her team and ECA members could do the work out on the ground. So we actually had a two-pronged approach. One was to treat mold in 2,000 homes, but we also had another component. We knew that there were homeowners out there that were confused about mold. There was a lot of different things in the press about mold. So we also worked with CUNY and with Rutgers Public Health Schools to also do a training program. And just to give you some statistics, we delivered trainings to approximately 800 homeowners in the affected areas, including NYCHA residents, and over 3,200 mold kits were distributed. And during that process, we educated homeowners about the neighborhood revitalization program. So we really worked hard to get word out there that help for mold was there. We set up this program specifically to be able to target those homeowners as quickly as possible, because we knew that there would be a gap between other help coming their way or, as Brad mentioned earlier, not being eligible. The other thing, the unique position of the Mayor's Fund allowed them to bring on additional funders. So we had the support of the American Red Cross. We had the support of a number of other philanthropic entities. And overall, we got $15 million raised to be able to do mold treatment in these areas. And thanks to the framework that we've now set up with all of these vast members and different city entities, we now have a workable framework, and we're now working on a home repairs program with LISC. Now that the mold has been removed, we're now moving on to do small home repairs, where again there's that gap in services where they may not be eligible for a whole host of reasons for federal dollars. We now can fill that gap with philanthropic dollars, and that's the focus of what we've been working on.
Thank you, Geraldine. One of the really important things about this program as well was that there was a lot of concern. You read it in the media, you heard it on the streets about people not having mold remediation, and we heard about tens of thousands of homes or more that needed this kind of help. And it was easy to say that there was no one doing anything about it. As soon as we had a program and a phone number that people could call, a lot of that really went away. In fact, most of it went away, because we still today, if we had someone who needed to have mold cleaned from their homes, they could call and sign up right now. So that it really helped size the problem and get it under control and take that big psychological issue as well as the health issue off the table. I want to now move to discussing a little bit about how we can make New York more resilient for the next event. And Dick, that's really what your report is all about. Can you just give us a little synopsis of what's in there and what we can learn about going forward and how we can deal with future disasters, and particularly how it might affect the environment?
With all of the good work that was done before, during, and after the storm, why wasn't it good enough? Why did we really come up so short going into this? Why weren't we better prepared? The Building Congress set up a task force that our chairman, John Dionisio of AECOM, wanted right from the beginning. He said, we have got experts on all sides of this issue. Let's put a group together, get someone from outside of our direct membership to chair it. We got Richard Ravitch, a former lieutenant governor, to chair it. There were 9 task forces, and they really got into a lot of the issues. Lou Coletti mentioned one that he chaired on emergency response procedures. And the thing that, the areas that they focused on were 3. One was reliable power. Number one issue, why, with the most reliable utility in the country by far in Con Edison, did we have as much loss of power as we did? Secondly, they pointed to the need for greater resiliency in both infrastructure and structures, and why weren't we better prepared there? And finally, in government, why weren't we better prepared, as Lou Coletti pointed out, for dealing with hiring contractors and having things in place, despite the fact that we've got some of the best codes, some of the best procedures, particularly in the city of New York, anywhere in the world. And it was the conclusion was very clear: is that we're much more reactive than we're proactive. And what you're hearing about this morning is all the good things we did after the fact. And we did them very well. I agree with what everyone said here, that our ability to respond to this storm with all of our institutions, all of our planning, was probably as good as any place, and certainly better than some of our neighbors around the region. But we need to be in a position where we have more reliable power going in. So we're getting $50 billion for the region from the federal government. Not one penny is dealing with more reliable power, because it's private utilities, and investor-owned utilities don't get public funding. So here we are. We identified this as the #1 priority. A lot of other people agree with that, yet there's no federal money. So there are lots of things that we found that can be done to get to be better prepared, better emergency response procedures. Lou Coletti's group pointed out the lack of indemnification, the lack of pre-qualification. There are lots of things like this. So as good as we are in reacting to storms, we can be much better in preparing for them in the future, and we have to do that, or we're going to be at the mercy of the next storm.
That's great, Dick. And people can find the report by, where can they find that if they'd be interested in a copy of it?
Buildingcongress.com, or give me your card and we'll send you one.
Great, thank you. You know, the private sector plays a very, very important role in all this, and we've heard some of how the contractors are mobilized. There are also individual contractors who have great services and products to provide that may be unique, may be innovative, or may just be the basics that you need to get this done. And it's hard sometimes to figure out exactly how to integrate them into operations early and effectively. So we've got two members of our panel here who can speak to that. So let's start with Brian, then go to Steve and talk a little bit about your experiences and how your organizations integrate into the Hurricane Sandy response.
Well, I'll start and then I'll hand it over to Brian.
Okay.
As Gary DiPaolo mentioned earlier, it's very important to have a plan in place. So when there's an emergency, you know who to call and what to do. We received a call prior to Hurricane Sandy from a client that requested for us to install a wall around their building. This building was near the Hudson River, and it had 3 exposed sides to it. It took 17,500 sandbags and 2,500 linear feet of Jersey barricades to provide a wall that was 4 feet high and went around this building. And the purpose for that was to try to keep the water from coming into the building. Obviously, we closed put sandbags on the entrances and steel plates in the loading dock areas with sandbags in front of it. Well, after the storm came and went, there was no water that came into this building. And this building was the only building that had power downtown. Why? Because they planned and called the right people and they looked ahead. What businesses are doing now, what we see is they're planning for another hurricane as big as Sandy, and what they're doing is they're installing removable flood walls. They're lightweight, they're easy to install, and they can be stored on site. And I'm going to turn it over to Brian so he can explain some of this new system that's out there.
Thank you. Again, our system is a completely removable flood wall system. We use extruded aluminum planks and steel posts that bolt down into steel embeds that are reinforced in concrete. Now, these embed plates are the only part of the system that are there permanently. It is therefore what we like to call an invisible system. When it's up, it's there, it's protecting, and when it is gone, it's invisible. You don't even think about it for the next, hopefully 5, 10, 20 years before we have another subsequent event. We've been very fortunate working with Structure Tone that we have several ongoing installations, both with public and private industry going around Manhattan and other Sandy-affected areas. We've definitely been implementing the system in a proactive way, because just by the nature of our system, it requires some forethought. You do actually have to have to pour the embeds beforehand. So it is not a reactive system where, oh God, we need 20,000 sandbags and we need hundreds of laborers to not only put these sandbags up, but then to clean up the disaster, really, the mess of a post-sandbag flood event. I would also like to point out that currently we have an installation going on, literally right now at Bellevue Hospital, which Chief Tobin cited as one of the most impactful disasters that hit in New York. I would imagine mostly because it has a larger community impact by taking out a major healthcare facility. And further stressing the medical infrastructure, which is so important when we have a major event like this in the city. But now that we have some flood walls in place, it is certainly my hope that in the future Bellevue will be mitigated from this kind of disaster, and hopefully many other key infrastructure points and buildings can be mitigated as well with this type of technology.
Thank you. But what I'd like to do is just go back around the panel one more time with 1 minute each, just to hear your number one lesson learned from this event that you can carry forward to the next incident, particularly focused on environmental issues. Bob?
Yeah, number one, I think, obviously my friend Dick Anderson spoke about essentially investing in the city of New York. You invest in the city of New York by having public-private partnerships. Lessons learned are you need to be ready. We can't be reactive. We need to be proactive. That goes back to the question you had before, Brad. We have an emergency management plan that speaks to environmental concerns that has crossover effect, obviously, to other areas. That needs to be implemented. Not everybody has the answer. Bring everybody to the table. Public-private sector working together. With regard to LISC, we welcome the opportunity to go national with you, to set the model not only for New York City, but the rest of the country. And I thank you, Denise, for your participation. Geraldine, you and I worked on many projects throughout the city, and I thank you as well. But this shows how people coming together, the Environmental Contractors Association, I'm so proud to represent them because they get it. They understand that they have a role. They have a role to protect the people of the city of New York, protect the businesses, protect our investment. The investment is people. The investments are the business that function in New York City. That's the lesson learned.
Thanks, Bob. Mike?
I'm going to have to agree with Bob and all the other panels. I mean, it's very important that we have plans. I mean, in our division and all our bureau, we have plans. We know what we're doing, but it doesn't get out there until after the fact. We've been very lucky over these years to work with the Environmental Contractors Association, so that synergy is there. So we really never have a problem when there's an incident because they know what we want. They know what we're looking for. They know that we're going to try to do the best to make the job easier while protecting everybody. But I think it goes back to this theme that we've had here today, is that, these plans need to be in place beforehand so when we can all hit the ground running. I mean, we spent a lot of time, as I said before, working with the Army Corps and with Brad's group and the Build It Back and the recovery, going over some of these issues and working them out. And if we could have those things in place beforehand, I think it would help everybody.
Thank you, Mike. Stephen?
Again, proper planning is key, and making sure that the contractors are trained and they call the right person for the job.
Very good. That's very simply put, but just right. Geraldine?
I think one primary lesson learned is the need to grow and maintain open communications between the city and the community-based nonprofits. There's a number of city agencies that work with these nonprofits, including the Mayor's Community Affairs Unit, NYC Service, Office of Emergency Management, Office of Immigrant Affairs. They all have relationships with these nonprofits who did serve impacted residents. But I do think we can always improve the regularity of the lines of communications between these groups and really understand what they can offer in times of an emergency.
Thank you, Geraldine. Denise?
I agree with my colleagues, and Bob, I am looking forward to a national program. I'll also say I think that the biggest lesson learned for me is an issue that I don't think that we've addressed fully, and that is the role of insurance in all of this. And so I think the most difficult thing looking back was really trying to figure out how to line it up adequately for everybody involved. So I think that's an open issue that we need to think about.
Thank you. Brian?
I'm going to go ahead and duck your question and answer Gary's question.
Okay, you get 30 seconds for a success story.
Yeah, no problem. We had an installation at a place called Burnham Hall. It's a city hall up in Lincoln, Vermont. It sat right on the banks of the New Haven River. When Hurricane Irene came through, the river came up, flooded basically the whole town, but the townspeople had come together and installed the system, our system, which was already on hand, and the building came through completely unscathed, really without a drop of water, and they continue today to be our biggest advocates.
Okay. And Dick?
Appoint a deputy mayor for infrastructure and require that person to provide an annual report that does three things. The state of reliable energy for the city and the metropolitan region. Two, a report on the state of the city's capital budget and capital program. And three, an emergency procedures report that would be delivered to the mayor on how we are prepared for the next emergency.
Okay, thank you very much. As we wrap up this panel, I just wanted to, it's a large panel, but I do want to recognize one person not on the panel who is really a giant in the world of environmental protection, who is often an unsung hero, but it's been very important to me throughout my career with the city, and that's Krish Radhakrishnan. Just a little recognition for our good friend Krish. I can't tell you how many difficult spots he's gotten me out of. Thank you very much to the panel. We appreciate everything you've done, and on to the next part of the program. Thank you, everybody.
I would now like to welcome Cass Holloway, the New York City Deputy Mayor of Operations. Cass is our keynote speaker and a dear friend of the ECA. He has supported our association through countless initiatives, and we are grateful for all his help throughout the years. As Deputy Mayor, Cass oversees 11 mayoral agencies and offices, assists the mayor in overseeing the Police Department, Fire Department, Office of Emergency Management, Office of Management and Budget, and the Office of Labor Relations. Please join me in welcoming Cass. We've heard so much about him today.
Well, I'm not sure what you heard, but I wasn't here, so I hope it was good. Good morning, everybody. I want to start just by acknowledging somebody who I know is greatly missed by everybody here, Frank Garrido, who I'm sure has been spoken about, but I wanted to say from my own personal perspective, when I met Frank, and it was really in the context of, I think, the first conference that we had, which was 4 years ago now. I knew that this was an organization that was for real, and I knew that it was going to be a really serious effort to pull together a vitally important group and really increase its profile and do some really important things for this industry. So just wanted to acknowledge and maybe offer a quick round of applause for Frank, even though he's not here. I hope he can hear it. So it is a bittersweet to be here before you today, the fourth time. There are 89 days left in the Bloomberg administration, and it has been with the ECA. The reason I look forward to this conference and that I always make sure that I can accommodate it on the schedule is because not only was it instrumental in a lot of the success that I've had, it is such an important organization in so many different ways, and ways that couldn't even have been imagined when it was started and when the first conference happened 4 years ago. Back then, this was all about safety, and safety is always going to play a prominent role in what the organization, I think, as a substantive matter, in addition to, obviously, the Contractors Association is really important in terms of helping to set standards, helping to get business, helping to do all of those things, but also ensuring that that you're constantly raising the bar on what it is in this profession that you have to focus on. And the safety of the workers and the safety of the public comes first and foremost. But I think we saw with Hurricane Sandy that the ECA can also perform, and did perform, a vital role in helping with recovery that well, of course, when the storm hit and we were trying to put together a mold program through the Mayor's Fund, and I reached out to Bob Aveltroni, and he and I had a lot of back and forth about this, working with Brad and the Mayor's Fund team to put together a mold program that's been in 1,600 homes and will go to 2,000. But think about what it would mean if this organization didn't exist. There wouldn't have been anybody to go to except the phone book. And we would have been literally searching the internet, making a list of firms, or we would have gone to DEP and Krish, I know we have registration of firms, but I can't tell you how it immediately, I knew that if we could engage the ECA to assist in this program, that once all of the contract difficulties were worked out, and thank you to the lawyers for those challenges, it's always nice to overcome them, we did something truly extraordinary, and something that I think everyone in this room should remember. Those are the moments when organizations like this demonstrate a value that is so much greater than the sum of its membership, so much greater than the intention of it as a professional organization to advance your interests. I can say with confidence that that program, which is still underway, is an integral reason why the people who are most impacted in the neighborhoods around the city generally feel like the administration did a good job in response to Hurricane Sandy. Now, I can give you 15 other reasons why I believe that to be the case. And I went out to the Rockaways on Monday because 1 month in advance of the 1-year anniversary of Sandy, I wanted to go out and just see for myself, when people start coming out here and setting up the cameras and doing the 1-year retrospectives and going to the locations that everybody remembers so vividly, what are they going to see? And I was encouraged in large part because parts of the neighborhoods that were most impacted, I wouldn't say they're totally back to normal, but they're neighborhoods. And Jacob Rees Park is back. The parking lot, which if you did a before and after of when we had tons and tons of debris there, you could pretty much eat off the parking lot. I didn't do that, but it is amazing what a difference 11 months makes, and it's because of the efforts of a lot of people in this room. All of that notwithstanding, we all know that in the public's mind, once you had the basic services back and that people needed, the mold issue was front and center, and people had questions. Is it a health crisis? What do I do? How do I even get a contractor? We heard stories about people getting charged $10,000 for a remediation job. Something had to be done. And it's one of those classic situations where the public sector on its own is not best positioned to get the job done, because in order for the public sector to basically take this work and do it, we would have had to declare that mold was a public health hazard to be remediated. Now, I talked to Dr. Farley at the health department, and this is one of those moments where you're wrestling with the perception of a problem, the reality of mold in homes, and what it means in terms of a precedent for public policy going forward. And the reality was that the science shows that while it didn't pass the threshold for immediate public health crisis, it was a huge problem. So the city was not in a position, even though we picked up a lot of other stuff, to pick this up on our own. And without the ECA being willing to come to the table and step into the breach and work with LISC and the Mayor's Fund, I'm not sure where we would be on this. And I can tell you that it was having a very deleterious effect on all of our other efforts, and Brad will certainly back me up on that. So I want to just one more round of applause for you for that effort. So the Sandy work continues, and the one-year anniversary is upon us, and I think it is a good moment to reflect on what the long-term implications of that storm are. What does it mean for the city? What does it mean for ECA? Well, I think first and foremost, as a matter of public safety, after you take care of the immediate recovery efforts, the first thing we looked at was how did we do? And we put out a report that was an after-action report with 60 recommendations in it. And we have to we're putting together a whole bunch of what we're calling playbooks to ensure that some of the long-term challenges that we faced after Sandy, that I will candidly say, we didn't have an off-the-shelf plan ready to go. I think the city did a good job when it came to food distribution, working on the fuel issue, ultimately developing a groundbreaking rapid repairs program, doing door knocking and all of those things, and that's a testament to the resources and skill set, building a mold program that the City of New York has. But ideally, just like opening those shelters and getting people out of the flood zone, many of these things you want to have as turnkey, ready to take off the shelf and turn on. And I'm happy to say that we are well along the road to getting that done. Now, there are going to be other things. I don't know what the next crisis or disaster is going to be, and it probably isn't going to be a superstorm. But I think, so that is the immediate preparation. I think ECA has a vital role to play in that, and I think ensuring that our successors know institutionally that it doesn't take somebody who has intimate knowledge of the organization and this particular kind of need, environmental remediation, who just happens to be in the right chair at City Hall at the right time. We need to institutionalize this, so we're going to do that and make sure that the partnership with the ECA stays strong. Then there's the rebuilding and making New York City resilient for the future. And this group, and I'm saying this in different ways to different audiences, I think when you're at an advocacy group, they can advocate for environmental and sustainability policies. When you're at a professional organization, you can look at it just in terms of you're going to be called upon when the need is greatest to do work that is the hardest, and you're going to be asked to do it fast. And I think one of the things that can mitigate the damage and the need for those emergency resources is ensuring that the comprehensive resiliency plan that the mayor developed and we put out in June is actually implemented. Now, I'm concerned about that because that will take 10 years at a minimum of concerted effort. And it will take repeated year-on-year commitments in the capital plan. It will take the retention of competent people on city tax levy payroll in operational positions in the city to ensure that it's implemented. And unless organizations like ECA and the whole group of professional organizations whose members and whose stakeholders are the ones who can be most severely impacted by a disaster, but also the ones who, if we're prepared, can respond in a way that is going to bring us back as quickly as possible, this organization has a key role to play in that. So I would ask you, as the Bloomberg administration exits the stage, we're not gone yet, by the way, we still have a bunch of big things to do, including many DEP-related things, so look out. But as we exit the stage, what I don't hear enough about, you're starting to hear it, but in the campaigns, what are people's plans? Do they embrace the plan that we've put out that is well thought out? And objectively speaking, I don't think you can find a negative word out there about it, and this is by people who know, in addition to the public. But it's okay. Mayors come in, they do different things. I know there are people here. Ricardo has seen a number of administrations. I'm confident that people will come in and make lots of changes. If they're not going to implement that plan, what are they going to do? Because it's not going to be acceptable not to do anything. And if we do nothing, or if we slow down the pace of preparation, if we disinvest in those things that are not popular. When we put the first $2 million in the coastal storm plan to store water and food and cots in New Jersey, that was not an easy sell to the budget director in 2007. Thank God we did that. Putting hundreds of millions of dollars into resiliency initiatives when there are lots of competing demands in the city of New York is not going to be easy to do. And as time goes on and memories get fuzzy about how bad it was and what the ground looks like, those competing priorities are going to become more and more potent as ways to knock off this agenda. Now, we have tried in the Bloomberg administration to make these efforts part of the DNA of government. We built offices, we dedicated resources, we put money in the capital budget, and we are going to continue to do that. But it is only if the political will exists at the professional, the stakeholder, the citizen level to demand that, hey, these investments are in our long-term interests. We save in the long run in terms of lives and property if we put this plan in place. So I hope you will do that. And I look forward to being a guest at future ECA breakfasts. I thank you for the tremendous support that you have offered over the years, your willingness to respond to really urgent issues in terms of, first and foremost, the fundamental safety of your profession, but then working with the city to really make us better at doing what we do. I also want to give a nod to Krish and Mike Gilsonen and the team and Charlie Sturken. Thank you, gentlemen. It's been an honor and a privilege, and I'm sure our paths will cross repeatedly in the future. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I thank you for all being here this morning. I had everything prepared to write, but I think you've heard the last panel and you heard what we've done to work with the city and the city work with us, and the people that we're honoring these people today because of the good work they did and the hours they spent, the tireless hours they spent working with us to get our contractors a good contract and to get out there and do the work that obviously they did well. I can't tell you how proud I am to work for the ECA and these contractors. They're great people, and they are willing to work with anybody, and they're willing to help anybody, and I'm just so proud of them. So we're going to start off today honoring the first person we're going to honor is Kaz Holloway. He's been our supporter from the beginning. For 4 years, he came when we had a conference that was maybe 10 people, and he was there saying he will be here every year, and he's been here every year, and he helped us through this whole contract and with the flood, and he's just always there for us. So, Kaz, we want to thank you so much for being here, supporting us, and helping us, and so we'd like to honor you if you want to come up and get your award. The next award we're going to give is to Brad Gare. We met him a couple of years ago. He came in from way far away. I don't remember where it was, but he came in. He met with us. We talked about this plan that we've talked about and that Kaz talked about and Bob talked about. And we did put a plan together with his help. We've had it. He's been also a great supporter. He worked with us through this whole storm after the storm math. And we're very proud to work with you. Hopefully we'll work with you in the future. And we want all of you to thank Brad for being with us and helping us to get done what we did get done. You're very welcome. And last but not least, absolutely, Denise Scott. Denise and I emailed every single day, it seems like, for months and months and months. She always, no matter what I asked of her, she came back right away with an answer. It was usually, absolutely, we'll cooperate with you. We'll do whatever we can to get your members out there and to be fair. Denise, I can't thank you enough. You were just a delight to work with, and we want to thank you for helping us through this. Thank you so, so much. The last thing I would like to bring up is to commemorate Frank Garrido. A couple weeks ago, we lost a chairman, a dear, dear friend. He is, I can't tell you, he was a friend. He was so excited and passionate about the ECA. That's all he talked about. Even when he was ill and when he could hardly speak, he was calling me and saying, what are we doing about this, Joyce? What are we doing about that? His thought process was always do things, get the ECA out there, do whatever the projects are, just do it. You may fail, but you may succeed, and just continue doing. He was absolutely the wind beneath my wings when we went out on our own. His daughter is here, and I thank you for being here, Roellen. His ECA family, Patrick and Freddie and Lisa. We want to thank you for being here. We hope that you'll continue to work with us as your father did, Roellen. We are, in his honor, going to have a scholarship in his name. And every year, we don't have the details yet for the scholarship, but we are going to have something every year. Maybe we'll even have a golf outing that people can go to and enjoy. But he will be in our hearts forever. He will be a part of the ECA forever. And I want to tell everybody what a wonderful, tremendous man he was. And I thank you all for being here. Thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoyed the program and you got a lot out of it. And we will have something next year, and Kaz, you will be invited to it. Thank you all very much.